Okay, so we're going to talk about drawing with ink. I'm going to use some microns here, micron pins. So I've got a few different sizes. I tend to really like microns, they work really well. So they're pins, and then one of them is basically like a marker. Got the brush tip, okay, and you can tell this one's a little, been using this one for a while. It's, might be getting close to time to retire that one. Okay, so when you are drawing with ink, what you want to think about is that where it's different than drawing with charcoal or graphite is that you can't really blend. Okay, normally with graphite or charcoal, you'd put it down, then you kind of can smudge it around. You can use a blending step, but that's not something that's really very easy to do with, or just really doesn't happen, doesn't work with ink. Okay, so I'll start out. Let's see. Let's get this O3. Okay, so things for you to think about is that how do you get different values? How do you get different lights and darks? Well, one thing is that by using the width of the line. So this is an O3. So if I make a line, well, that's how it's going to look right there, right? And then this one's an 005, so it's a really thin pin. So obviously that's going to make a thinner line. Okay. We'll use the 08. It's kind of the largest one that's an actual pin. You can see it's a thicker line. And then of course we'll try out the brush. Okay, and so see, oh, there we go. It's more or less a marker, so it gives us a thicker line. So thinner lines are going to look lighter, and of course darker lines will look darker. And then any kind of variation in between. So the other thing that you can do with pen, and you can sort of do it. It works out. It does work, but takes a little practice. So let's say we were drawing with graphite or ink. Or not, graphite or charcoal. If you push down harder, of course it goes on darker. If you press lighter, it'll go on lighter. Well, you can sort of do that with the pens. So if you do a quicker line, like say something like that, right? I don't put much pressure. I can get the line to go on lighter. Well, if I push down a little more and I go a little slower, of course the line will go on darker because more of the ink will have a chance to bleed out of the tip of the pen. Okay, so even when you're sketching things, you just kind of keep the pen moving and light pressure and don't really stop moving, or don't get too methodical. And if you notice, I'm kind of tipping the pen because if you put the pen down straight, of course it'll give you a darker line, but if you tip it, it doesn't really let the ink bleed out as quickly. So that's another way too. It's just kind of the angle that you hold it at. Okay, and so then again, see, I can just kind of sketch quickly, and there we go. Without a whole lot of pressure, I was able to get that to go on. Again, relatively light. Okay, so the last thing, and it's the thing you'll probably use the most, is just density. So, you're pretty much going to be drawing on white paper. And so, with charcoal or graphite, the trick is if you want something to look darker, you cover the paper more. If you want it to look a bit lighter, and then of course you just don't cover the paper up as much. So it's it's the same concept. Okay, but what you have to do is you have to use either lines or dots or scribbles, or the type of mark doesn't really matter. But whatever the mark is, if you make them a little more dense, they're going to look darker. If you start spreading them apart more, they're going to look lighter. And of course, if you keep layering over certain things, it's going to look darker. And then if you don't layer as much, here we'll go a little more dark with lines. But again, if you don't layer it as much, then it's going to look lighter. So really, it's density. So it's line weight, the pressure, and then density. Okay, that'll do it. And so what you'll find is that you end up using different combinations. Some of these lines I didn't push down as hard. You can tell some that were in there when I first started sketching, I didn't push down as hard. And then of course I left the spacing a little bit more further apart over here, and then I put them really close together. So if I grab a thicker pen and do the same thing, see how it ends up going dark pretty quick. So you sort of end up using all three techniques when you're drawing, and what ends up happening is that, you know, as long as you're using them all together, you know, you'll end up in pretty good shape there. Okay, so the thing that we did in class was we drew a skull. So I'll demo a little bit of a skull. I'm not going to go too much into, into exactly how to draw a skull. Just a little bit. Okay, so you see I drew more or less, a circle or a sphere, you want to think of it that way. And then I did a bit of an oval. Okay, right there, that's what I'm doing. That's more or less the shape of the head. It's a circle and then with an oval over it. And then that oval is about a third longer than the sphere. So if you broke this up into threes, you just add one of those thirds on there, you know, roughly, and then that's how you get the length of the head versus the width. Okay, I'm gonna mark that as my center line, so I know that's where the center of the face is. Okay, this is the our right side, our left side of it. And then we'll put that there for to mark where the eyes are. This will be where the bottom of the nose is. Yeah, we'll put it like right there. And then, of course, the center of the mouth. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of sketch it. And if you notice, again, I'm using an 03 and see how it's drawn really light. I really wasn't trying to get very dark. So I pushed a little harder on some of these lines just to give it a little bit more weight. That's what will give you some more depth, is of course when you get darker. And so the trick isn't to outline everything and make it look super cartoony, because if you do that, then what ends up happening is it just doesn't really give you a good sense of the direction the light's coming from. And it won't look as natural. So even if you're drawing something like anime or, cartoons or something, you don't want to just outline things just to outline them. You want to try to do it intentionally. Okay. And so what I'm going to remember, I just kind of drew the shapes there, is that your nose kind of sticks out. So even though this, the skeleton's not going to really have a real nose on it, you are still going to see that little bit of bone. Okay, and so all this, the eye sockets and even across there, that's always a bit more dim. It's more in shadow. Okay, so when I go kind of block in some values there, I can cut across right there, and it won't really affect it. Okay, so I might end up adjusting the length there for the mouth itself. I'll just kind of do a sphere shape. This ends up looking a little bit like a smiley face, but it's just going to help me understand where the center of the mouth is. Okay, and so in the photo that we use, the light's kind of coming from the top, but it's kind of the upper right side. So it's kind of beaming in from there. Okay, so what ends up happening is that you get this whole, our left side, it's more in shadow. Okay, and there's a good little patch of light over here that I'll draw around. But even over here with the mouth. And again, you can tell for right now, I am just drawing kind of light. Trying to let everything build up a little slower. Okay, and so even on the nose, there's just little dark patches inside. There's actually a bone in the middle, so I got a little darker on these parts here because obviously it's pretty dark in there, but if you noticed, I didn't really try to go right to black. And same thing with the eye sockets. I'm not going to really try to go right to black just yet. Okay, because there's a whole bunch of different light passing through there. So even though it's kind of dim, what ends up happening is that there's some light that bounces around in there. So it's really not as dark as you think it is at first. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into really drawing the teeth. I'm just going to hint a little bit. I'll give it a little bit of weight. As I keep going, and what I mean by weight is just, make some little patches a little bit darker here and there. Okay. So if you notice, I've been drawing with the same pen for a while. So I am going to switch it up. And I just started with I think that was the 03. So I used something that was a little bit smaller, but it wasn't the smallest pen I had. You really don't have to use the smallest pen right away. I like starting with something kind of in the middle. So I switched to a thicker pen. And some of that's just so that some of these areas that I know for sure are darker, it's going to let me get there a lot quicker. Okay, so like in the eye sockets, yeah, no matter what, those eye sockets, they are in shadow, so they're going to be a bit more, like I said, dim or just dark. Okay, and some patches here with the teeth. And again, I'm just kind of abstractly drawing. I'm not really trying to sketch them in to look that realistic at this point. So, okay, so looking for a few more things here. Actually, the way the light goes here, it's almost catching a little more shadow on the front plane. And the side plane, the side part of the head, because there is a whole bone structure here, the back of the skull, that's actually catching a little bit less light. So watch, I'll use the really thin pen for some of these areas that are a lot lighter, or when I want to feather this out and let it kind of fade. This is the pen that I'll do most of that with. If you notice, I'm almost kind of flattening things out now, which is sort of what you end up doing in a drawing. So I started out by blocking out all the darks, but as I keep going, I start bringing up those midtones, the lighter tones. And what will happen is that I'm going to have to go back and darken up some of those dark tones again. This is just a little quick sketch. I'm not going to go too much further, but I am going to try to give it a little bit more weight here. There's still some lighter values on the top of the head I should probably go back in and get, but again, I'm just making this kind of a quick sketch. Okay. And so if I really want to give it some depth, a little more weight, this is something that, again, you don't want to go in and outline everything, but it's not even really that I'm doing an outline. There's some really thin, dark shadows that I am kind of emphasizing. So even like here, it's a good one right there. Got a little mark there. Well, and this is sitting on the table. That's kind of how we were looking at it when it was being drawn. And I'll actually go ahead and get the general shape of the shadow from the. And so even though I'm using the thick pen, I was kind of tipping the pen, so it's really not going on super dark. So now that I push down a little harder, draw my lines a little slower, or just bunch together even. Now I can get darker. Okay, and so, and maybe we'll stretch this out. I feel like it's kind of too much together there. And so why am I not just completely filling this in? Well, I don't want it to be completely filled in. Because again, then what will happen is that doesn't really describe what that shadow looks like. That shadow's not pitch black. Yeah, see, I'll kind of darken this up a little bit more. I'm just kind of dabbing the brush at it. I'll make one more pass over here by the nose. And there we go. Okay. And again, you'll notice I didn't really switch between too many different pens. So, you can get a big old set with a lot of variation in there. But honestly, once you get, you'll need some variations in there. But once you get good at using density and pressure and line weight, you can kind of mimic that with just a few different pens. Meaning like maybe 3 or 4. And again, you know, it's good to use the different ones. I technically could have drawn this all with just one size pen, but I'll tend to get better results as I keep drawing if I start using a couple of the darker ones to give me a little bit more weight. And then in some of the lighter areas, use the thin one like I did up there. Okay, so there's our little sketch.